Hello, I'm Michael Lambert, a fellow in social inequalities here at Lancaster University. And today I'm talking about the research that we do in relation to inequalities. So can I begin by asking, who am I speaking with? Who are you?
Hi, my name is Katie Podzus. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a first year PhD student within the Sociology department here at Lancaster University. My research is funded by the ESRC Northwest Social Science Doctoral Training Programme, and I'm being supervised by the wonderful Francesca Coyne and Bev Skeggs.
Magnificent. And within that, what is it that you do?
Okay, so broadly speaking, my interests lie within the study of sex work in the context of neoliberal capitalism. And I generally employ a pro-sex work, Marxist feminist theoretical framework in my research to do that. So for my PhD, I'm looking into the ways in which neoliberal capitalist ideologies and policies have created and or recreated social understandings of sex workers and sex workers themselves, specifically in times of crisis. So I'll be looking at the North Atlantic financial crisis of 2007-2008, and then more recently the COVID-19 pandemic as the primary context, as it were. But my research will also draw upon previous research that I've done in my two master's dissertations here at Lancaster. So in the first one, for instance, I looked at the ways in which social media platforms' exclusion of sex workers through practices like shadow banning and account suspensions served as a form of social control over and reinforced the stigmatization of sex workers. But at the same time, while these platforms simultaneously benefited from the work that these sex workers did. And then more recently, I investigated the various ways in which sex work has been portrayed within the UK mainstream media throughout the COVID-19 pandemic.
So I've already got a sense of this from the answers that you've given, but how is it that you go about researching what you do? What are the kind of methods, approaches, forms of analysis that you employ?
So I think, first of all, it's kind of important to say that within sex work research, there's an oft-repeated mantra or rule, as it were, which comes from the sex work community itself, which broadly speaking is nothing about us without us. And I very much try to abide by this and use it to inform my methodologies in my work. So as such, I want to include and amplify the voices of sex workers and sex worker-led organisations as much as possible, and particularly a range of sex workers, because that's something that a lot of the times certain types of sex workers are represented more so than others. So I'm hoping to conduct qualitative semi-structured interviews with sex workers when I come to do my fieldwork. But because I'm also interested in the ways in which sex work is constructed by specifically state and or corporate actors, I also intend to employ a feminist critical discourse analysis of media outlets, similar to what I've done previously. So in my most recent MA dissertation, I did that by looking at, for example, The Sun, The Guardian and the BBC, and found that each publication's attitude or framing of sex work throughout the pandemic and in relation to the pandemic differed in line with its political ideology. So I felt that that would be a really good way to explore how the needs of neoliberal capitalism seek to, I suppose, alter or shape dominant notions of sex work. And I thought that that would be a really good approach to use alongside the lived experiences of sex workers through interviews as well.
And from a personal point of view in relation to the centre itself, what I like most about that approach is it kind of embodies our ethos of thinking globally about inequalities and those kinds of broader theoretical frameworks, those bigger connections, the relationship to neoliberal capitalism, but then acting locally and nothing about us without us, making the primacy of the voice of those who are the subjects of inquiry, I think is the most important dimension of that. So for me, that encapsulates what I think or what I see as your relationship with inequalities. But can you give me one example of how your work intersects with inequalities?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the most kind of obvious point to make is that sex workers themselves are a particularly marginalized group within society generally, and in most societies or locales across the world, in fact. So, for example, many of those who work in the industry have been excluded for one reason or another from other types of work. So this might be due to racism, disabilities, transphobia, homophobia, and or due to the inadequate help or support from the state. So, for example, in terms of the benefits and financial support they can access. So their work is often criminalized as well, whether that's partially or entirely. And so that makes accessing various services and rights, so for example, the right to organise as workers as well, either difficult or impossible in some cases. So for instance, while the UK, selling sex isn't illegal, but working with another person is, and becomes brothel keeping.
Yeah.
But the fact that most of the sex workers that do this for safety reasons, or to avoid kind of certain precarities, then this becomes a really important way in which the state are actually further victimizing and marginalizing an already disproportionately marginalized group.
I think what struck me most about that kind of demonstration of the place of sex work in relation to inequalities was foregrounding this idea of work, of sex work as work, within this kind of broader analysis, and particularly I can see within your framework of crisis, capitalism, and of place, how that would sit and fit extremely well in trying to get under the skin of these issues. So can I finish by asking about your relationship to any other bodies, professional associations, organizations, or stakeholders that you're conducting your research with?
Yeah, of course. So I'm still in the very early stages of my research. So I've not got to the data collection stage just yet. But as I said, I'm hoping to engage when it does come to that with various sex workers and sex work organisations. So there are some absolutely amazing organisations that I've followed kind of in various respects for a while now, such as English Collective of Prostitutes and the Swarm, Hive, just name a couple that do excellent grassroots sex worker-led work. And so if there's any way I could contribute or work with them in the future, that would be the kind of thing that I would be really interested to do. But at the moment, I'm kind of in the early stages of joining a sex work research hub, which brings together academics concerning, whose focus is on sex work from various institutions across the globe. And so that's been really exciting because just that those geographical differences in sex work, I think, are really important, and they can also broaden, hopefully, my understanding of sex work within different locales and economies. Definitely,
and I look forward to maybe in a year or so's time, maybe speaking again and seeing how the research has developed. But Katie, I'd just like to say thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me today about your research and its relationship to inequalities.
Thank you very much.